So I want to start by, yes, thank you, Zoom. I want to start this live off now, this abortive or second attempt at this live, by speaking to leadership in the moment. And then we're going to go into our material. So what just happened was I created a live event. I set it up. I had the stream going. The way LinkedIn works is you can't really pre-test your stream. So you just have to set it up and go with it. You can do some stuff behind the scenes, but it's not quite the same as like a direct, fire test of going live with a scheduled event in the moment. So I set that up. I went live, and about 5 minutes into me talking, someone said, "Hey, I'm not sure, but I'm not getting any audio." Thank goodness. Thank you. I think it was Priya. Thank you, Priya, for saying that. And so I was like, oh my goodness. Okay, I got to figure that out. So I restarted. I had to reboot. And then I discovered you can't change this. You can't restart the stream or do anything like that. The event indicates it's ended, and that's that. And so, as they showed up, of course, I felt shame, stupidity, embarrassment. What kind of bozo doesn't have this all sorted out? I had this sort of concern, like, well, this doesn't do too much for my credibility, and so on and so forth. And all of this is the sort of stuff that shows up when we're first of all, I want to say I don't want to step over that. I really want to honor that stuff is there and real, and none of it felt pleasant. And sometimes I find in this culture of like vulnerability porn, as Seth Godin puts it, we can kind of say that stuff and move past it quickly, because then we get the kind of opportunity to pretend like we're being vulnerable, but not. All that stuff's very real. So I've been just being with that as I've been preparing to get back on, trying to solve this problem. And what I want to acknowledge is that one, all of that stuff is the reason we create the strategies we create that keep us stuck. Like very similar to imposter syndrome, a lot of what I'm describing, like, oh my God, I'm dumb, blah, blah, blah. And we create these strategies to try to make it perfect. So I could have made an excuse as an example of a strategy, or I could have just run away and never come back, or I could have blamed it on LinkedIn. Nope, that's this guy. This guy just didn't get that thing right. And this is the practice of leadership. This is the practice of ontological leadership in the moment, is to take the swing, to strike out, to fall on our face, to get back up, to acknowledge that happened, to be with how it feels in our body, and then to continue leading. And I don't mean by leading like I'm leading everyone in this conversation right now. By leading, I just mean continue to move down the path we're committed to moving down. So there's like a leadership opportunity in this moment for me to just be in the practice of what it's like for leadership. And I hope that there's like an opportunity to take something from that, from my sharing of that. Okay. So I've got T. I think we've got audio. If you can let me know in a comment, hey, I've got sound, that would be fantastic. And we're going to kick off. I'm going to scratch my nose because my mustache is poking me. I'm going to scratch my forehead because my hair is poking me. I'm going to drink a sip of tea, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to start by briefly talking about ontology, just a reminder sort of, I'm going to bring up my notes here. A reminder of what we are talking about when we speak to like ontological leadership. I'm going to talk briefly about the idea of a context, talk about how the typical leadership labels we apply to someone get in the way. I'm going to explain how the way we relate to someone, like help you see how the way we look at something is determinative of what you can do with it. Awesome. Thank you, Jared. Thanks for that comment. I'll talk about what we try to do and how it goes. And then finally, we'll finish with how you can have things go differently. So that's our agenda for today. Let's dive into that. So first, a reminder of what ontological leadership is. Ontological leadership is leadership as a practice based on who we are being rather than what we are doing. And the ontological layer is below what appears on the surface. And this is why, perhaps as a leader, you may have had this experience where you bring in leadership consultants or management consultants, or you hire someone, or you go to a leadership webinar and you're inspired at first, and you go and you try to put this stuff into action. You try to do the stuff that happens. Oh, thank you very much for that, Jared. I really appreciate that. You try to do the things that happen, or that you're told to do, or that seemed like a great idea, and they just don't seem to move the needle. They, in the short term, might have you feel like, hey, things are changing, but then somehow they just kind of get back. And that's because all the actions are correct. Everything in the layer of our doing is there, but what's missing is the shift in who we are being, either organizationally or as a leader or in terms of ourselves or our relationship to something. So the ontological layer is the reason that you are perhaps one of these people frustrated by the fact that most trainings don't seem to really make that much of a difference. They have a big promise, they leave you feeling very inspired, and then at the end you kind of feel like, meh, that didn't work. I guess it's not real. That's how most of us end up. So we're shifting that through this series where we talk about ontological leadership. Okay. So to start off with, I want to talk really quickly about the idea of a context for something, and we'll do a much deeper dive into this. But the idea of a context is a story or a set of beliefs or like a way I relate to or view a particular thing. So I can have a context about anything. I can have a context about sadness. I can have a context about anger at work. I can have a context about being poor. I can have a context about being rich. I'll just give you some quick examples. Like, here's one: rich people are snobs, or poor people are lazy. So these are a belief I have about a particular thing, any particular thing in the entire world. And you, as a human, have a context about literally everything. That is the nature of being a human. So I can hear I've got a little sand sculpture machine and it's making a bunch of noise. We're going to turn that off. See if we can get that stopped. That might have helped. So our context exists about everything, and it exists about people. We have stories about particular people, all of them. We have a story about our father. We have a story about our mother. We have a story about ourselves. We have a story about ourselves in this situation, and we have a story about ourselves in that situation. So this is the primary lens through which the human mind views the world. This is kind of like the you could think of it like the frame or the tint to which we see and receive everything that comes at us. And this is held in our mind. It's kind of like our ego a little bit, but ego is a more specific purpose. So we just think of it as something we keep in our mind. And so in the realm of leadership and what we're talking about today, we are specifically looking at contexts around particular people that you might be leading. So some examples of those contexts, you might have a story that like, this person is a good leader, or this person is lazy, or this person is very good candidate for leadership, and this person is a bad candidate for leadership. This person's committed, this person's reliable, this person's flaky. So all of these contexts, all of these relationships or lens through which we relate to people, they have some evidence to back them up, right? So like I spend some time working with you. Initially, I've got maybe a bit of a blank slate, although you'd be surprised at how quickly you create these labels for people. But over time, they do something, and then we start to conclude that's the way they are. So what happens is we create labels for these people, right? I've already listed a few of them. Here's another one. They're narcissistic, or they're selfish, or they're flaky. And these are the people that over time we start to relate to like, oh, this person's not a very good candidate for leadership. Now, at the start of our practice in leadership, we feel pretty committed to like the idea, hey, I'm gonna be able to lead anyone, and I want to lead anyone. I want to support people to be able to like step into leadership, and I want to be the kind of leader that can grow everyone. And this is the ideal model for leadership. The ideal model for leadership is a leader's job is to grow more leaders, to develop more leadership. And the ideal model is that the leader in question is capable of supporting anyone to blossom further into their own practice of leadership. That's what we're going for. That's the kind of model we want to see. That's what we want to ultimately create in ourselves, is that we're the sort of person that anyone can come to and we can support them further. So we're going to have a clash here. And the clash comes when we have that ideal, but we start to come up against people that are challenging for us, problematic for us. We have this person that we give feedback to, and yet they don't seem to change. We have this person that we then try to nudge along with advice, and it doesn't seem to make a difference. We have this person that blah, 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 blah. It just keeps happening. So there's many different factors involved in like supporting someone to move from point A in their leadership to point B. I want to be clear that we're looking at just one of those factors. And that factor we're looking at is your seeing of them. It's the way you are relating to them. After we look at that, there's all of the stuff like, but how do I actually support them to do X, Y, and Z? But before we can support them to do any of that stuff, we have to look at the way you are relating to them, because the way you are relating to them is going to dictate how everything goes. So that's what I want to start to lay out now. So what we try to do with people is we first conclude, oh, I really want to support this person. And then over time, we try to give them suggestions, advice, develop their leadership, nudge them in a direction, give them feedback in a 360 review. And what we notice is that kind of we develop this way of relating to them. Reggie is just not that willing to do things. Reggie is belligerent. Reggie is resistant. Reggie is, and then ultimately, like the sort of death toll for all of leadership is not a candidate for leadership. This is where your ability to lead becomes abdicated. It's the death toll for it, because now you have concluded this person is not someone for which I can develop. They're just not available to be developed as leader. And even worse, you put it on them rather than seen as like an opportunity for you in your leadership. So what happens is we develop this relationship to this person, this way of relating to them. So-and-so is flaky. And then we kind of try to take steps to support them, but all of those steps are done through that particular way of relating to them. So if I relate to you as flaky and I sort of like, okay, what if maybe I'll just, Adam, I saw this thing that Adam said, so I'm going to just practice trusting that they're not flaky. How about that? I'm going to give them some responsibility because I'm going to assume that they're not. And then what you do though, is you kind of, you keep watching over them because you're afraid, because you haven't actually given up this idea that they're flaky. You're kind of layering this opportunity over top of this underlying belief that they are flaky. And so maybe you sort of start doing stuff in the background to set yourself up so that they don't cause the problem you're afraid that they're going to cause the problem of, or maybe you kind of micromanage them as they're doing this, or whatever. And ultimately, what happens is that anything you do is going to be tinted by your relationship to them, and it's going to start to reinforce it. So what's going to happen is you're going to watch them, you're going to give them this opportunity, and you're going to become kind of hyper vigilant to the way that they show up that is going to affirm your seeing of them. We tend to see more of what we are looking for. And so if my relationship to you is that you are flaky, I'm going to analyze what you do through the lens of you're flaky. And then I'm going to find the evidence that supports you're flaky, my story that you're flaky, and I'm not going to find any other evidence. I'm not going to see any of the other stuff. And so what happens is you're kind of in this situation, you're kind of screwed. There's almost nothing you can do to change my opinion of you as it starts to become more and more reinforced. And so we can give kind of an example. I think we might have talked about this in the past, but let's imagine that we're going to introduce this concept of someone's essence and then bring it back here. So let's imagine we have someone who is commitment, the way of being that they've learned to bring to the table, the way that not even learn to bring, just part of who they are. And people on your team that are commitment will be people that have, you put them on any team and that team starts to become more more committed in its actions. It becomes more reliable to hit its deadlines. It becomes more kind of devoted to the work that is required. Maybe they even are more willing to work overtime. All of these sort of things are part of what goes with the essence of commitment. So you might have someone on your team like that. But when someone who has that energy starts to get afraid, meaning that they feel threatened about who they are, they feel that they're not doing enough, or maybe they're being too much. Let's look at not doing enough. So from that place, what they start to do is, I'm not enough. They're going to double down. So they have this fear, I'm not enough, and they turn to the tools that they know. They're going to turn to commitment. So they're going to turn up the energy of their commitment. They're going to commit even harder. Maybe they'll move their deadlines even further forward. Maybe they'll work even more hours. Maybe they'll say yes to even more things, thereby on some level kind of proving energetically that they are enough, outrunning their fear. But of course, what's going to happen is they're going to become overcommitted. And when we become overcommitted, what happens is we start to drop balls. We are operating beyond our capacity, beyond our scope. So we start to drop balls. And as we start to drop balls, we get really afraid that we're really failing. And so then what happens, kind of like a reactive pendulum swing in the other direction, is we pull all the way back and we really withdraw from commitment. So we start to become very resistant to saying yes to anything. We stop committing to things, or we become unwilling to give any kind of deadline, or we learn how to be kind of waffly. I'll give you a deadline, but it's kind of waffly. Now, all of the things I'm describing describe flakiness. That's the energy of flakiness. So if I'm working with you and I'm seeing all this stuff and I think of you as like, well, you're flaky, what options do I have to work with someone who's flaky? I can try to like tell them to like learn how to manage their time better, or I can, you know, have them sit down with someone who's an expert in calendar management, and they can learn all of these tips and tricks to manage their calendar better. I can give them a new task management tool. I can teach them Todoist, whatever, that sort of stuff, because I'm trying to solve the problem of flakiness. But the trouble is not that they don't know how to do this stuff. I mean, they might, right? There's a possibility they don't know, but most people with a good degree of executive function, this isn't really the issue. The issue is that they're being confronted. They are feeling afraid. And from their fear, what they're doing is overcommitting. So there's no amount of expertise in knowing how to use a calendar or a to-do list or whatever that is sufficient to overcome that fear. We have to deal with the fear at the level of fear. If we're ignoring that, you could teach someone to be the greatest time manager in the world, and they're still going to find a way to become overcommitted because that's what they're doing to overcome their fear. That's their response to their fear. This is a little bit analogous to how lawyers all want better time management in their life. If you go to lawyers and you're like, what's something you would really love? Most of them would be like, I'd love to have better time management. Lawyers manage their time down to 10-minute increments, sometimes 6-minute increments, like tenths of an hour. That's how good they manage their time. Lawyers are some of the best at managing time. I'm a former lawyer. I know. We're exquisite at it. It's not an issue of time management, and no amount of trying to get better and better and better at time management is going to make the difference, because that's not really the issue. That's just what presents on the surface. Likewise, no amount of teaching this person the things that help you overcome flakiness is really going to address the issue, because that's not really what the issue is. The trouble is, to bring it back to where we're looking, if my lens, if all I can see about this person is this box called flaky, I'm going to try to give them tips and tricks and books to read and other stuff, which, by the way, is just going to add to their overwhelm, add to their overcommitted. I'm going to try to set them up for meetings with this person, and none of it will make a difference because it cannot. No amount of putting Band-Aids on flesh-eating bacteria will solve the issue. And so what we do is, in this metaphor, we'd label that wound not a candidate for healing. That's ridiculous, but that's what it occurs to us. And so we try to do this stuff to someone. We try to give them all of the help that we can see, thinking we're a good manager, calling ourselves a good leader, until eventually we conclude they're just not a candidate for leadership. I've given them everything. I've tried to do it all. Adam, you don't understand. This person, just not a candidate for leadership. It's not that they're not a good candidate for leadership. It's that your seeing of them is shallow. You are only able to see the top of the iceberg, the 10% that exists above the water. And you are trying to move that iceberg by pushing at that top 10%. And all that's happening is it's swaying, it's penduluming back and forth in the water because you can't see the full picture. To close this loop, what happens is the more you try to help them, the more it actually exacerbates the problem, because the underlying issue isn't getting addressed. They start to feel your anxiety about them not performing enough, and that heightens their fear. And then from their fear, oh my God, they try to double down even more, which then recreates the same problem, and so on and so forth. So it becomes a very vicious cycle. And because the only thing you are able to see is they are flaky and they are not working with this stuff, and that what ends up happening is it proves the sort of veracity, the truth of your belief about them. So the more that you kind of try to solve the problem you have labeled them as having, the more it actually reinforces that problem and recreates the truth of your belief. So your belief, your seeing of them becomes entrenched. It becomes locked in. And any action we try to take from this incomplete model is doomed to failure, because it's only getting at part of the picture. So I'm hopeful that as I'm describing this, you're starting to see some of the kind of power and the what's available down an ontological model. When we look at someone through the lens of ontological leadership, what we are doing is we're training in ourselves the ability to see a bigger part of the picture so that we can address the wholeness of the issue, which then often can take longer than it looks like it should, because there's so much more below the surface. But the work we do actually has traction. It actually makes a difference. And that's where transformation occurs, is when we can actually create a shift. So we've got this issue, which is that for the most part, we relate to what's happening on the surface. We believe we are seeing the wholeness of it. We sit down and talk to them, but of course, they're in the same water that we are. Our direct report, our leadee, the person we're trying to develop. And so, even trying to understand them, we can't seem to get out of this water because we haven't learned anything ontological. And I want to take a moment here to sort of speak to some of the dangers of typing-based approaches. Typing systems like Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs are systems that sort of you do a series of tests, and then that sort of labels you a particular way. Your bias is in this direction. You tend to like this stuff. This is how you are. This is how you tend to show up. Some other examples would be DISC typing profile. There's intermetrics, or maybe it's called trimetrics now. They've kind of, I don't know which one of those they're on these days. But these are systems that are designed to you answer a whole bunch of questions, and they give you a fairly surprisingly accurate report of who you are or how you show up or any of that sort of stuff. But the trouble is that for all of these, they put a label on us. And as soon as we get labeled a certain way, that's, again, how people are going to relate to what's showing up. So I want to give a really quick example here so you can see what I'm talking about. One of the core types in Myers-Briggs is the E or the I, the extroverted or the introverted. The extrovert is the person that likes to talk to people and is sourced by going and talking to people. The introvert is the person that is sourced by staying internal, that tends not to like a little bit afraid of a lot of energy, and so on and so forth. It's a giant B right outside my window. So what happens is people get this sort of typing, and they experience a lot of relief. They realize, oh my goodness, I'm an introvert. No wonder I've been trying to do all of this stuff. I hated it. It didn't feel good. I often felt awkward. I don't like going to networking events. Now I have a reason why. Now I understand. So now they have a fixed model for who they are and what they're able to do. And that fixed model says, you will not like going and doing stuff in public. You will enjoy sourcing by yourself. After a certain amount of time, 1 hour, 2 hours, half hour, you need to go inwards, blah, 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 blah. I want to offer you that same person, but I want to look through the lens of connection as a quality of being. And so connection, kind of like commitment, it's another essential nature. It's a quality of being. The quality of connection, someone who has connection is a natural connector. You sit down with them, they're going to learn your name, almost guaranteed. You're going to look in their eyes and feel an immediate almost intimacy or a depth of connection that's available. People who are connection like getting to know people. And so consequently, sometimes that looks like being the life of the party, but sometimes that looks like really not liking small talk, because I want to get to know you. I don't want to just talk about the weather. I want to know about you and your deepest, darkest fears. And what do you love? And what are you excited about? And all of that sort of stuff. When we have that quality, we can learn, as everyone does, that it's either too much or too little, and oftentimes both. So when I learn in the situations where my connection is too much, i.e., maybe I go and connect with someone, I open myself up, and they make fun of me, or they close on some level, and I feel like, what I learn is that natural state of being that I have is too much. I got to dim it. So I pull away from connection. I draw inwards, and I keep my connection from going out too far. Alternatively, I might go to situations and worry that I feel awkward or uncomfortable. And in those situations, I respond by being super connector. So like in networking events or parties where I'm like, oh my God, I feel like a bit of a dork here, I become very charming and outwardly facing and glib and all of that stuff. So these are two kind of strategies that come out of connection. They're a corresponding strategy to overcome the underlying fear of being too little or too much. And guess what these strategies look like? The first one that I described, going inwards, pulling away, that's introversion. And the strategy of being glib and open and going and being the life of the party, that's extroversion. And so the trouble with these typing mechanisms is they put a label on these strategies, and then we identify with ourselves as the strategy, as opposed to being able to see the full expanse of the picture, which is, oh, who I am is connection, but perhaps in this situation, that might be a bit edgy for me. Maybe I'm getting a little afraid, and what I'm doing is I'm pulling inwards. This isn't to say that there's not a time and place to pull inwards, or a time and place to sort of be the charming, extroverted, glib, slick rainmaker. Just like there's a time and a place for everything. The thing is that as soon as we have a label for someone or ourselves, we no longer have a choice. We now operate as that label. And so this is a bit of the danger. Many typing systems work to like overcome this, but it's a bit of the danger of the typing system as it becomes the way through which we relate to one another. And once we start doing that, it becomes fixed. So the way that this can stop someone's leadership is I now relate to you because you did your MBTI thing. You're now introvert. You know, you're an INTFZ, whatever, INTJ. I think that'd be something. You're an introvert. And so now anytime I ask you, do you want to do this opportunity to talk in front of you people? No, I'm actually an introvert, so I'm going to choose out. Or I might just not ask you anymore because I now relate to you as an introvert, as opposed to sort of being able to see the whole picture and be like, oh, Reggie has this beautiful quality called connection, but they're still learning to step over it. Reggie, I know that you're crossing a threshold and you're practicing, and the next level of your leadership that I see available is to start to be the connection I see you are amidst a larger group of people. I've got an opportunity here. Would you like to practice? And then Reggie can be seen as the connection they are and seen as the thing that they've learned to do and make a decision. Is this the time where I want to step past that threshold? So far more possibility becomes available as we can see all of the dimensions of how someone's showing up. The more of that iceberg we can see, the more power we have over it. And by power, I don't mean the more you can manipulate someone to do what you think they should do. What I mean by power is the more you can support them to create the impact you're committed to creating for and with them. Okay. So now we're going to go to the last little bit of our talk here, which is what can we do about this? And I want to just reiterate here a lot. This is the point where a lot of people say like, yeah, that's all fine and good, Adam, but at some point you have to do something with this person, which is true, but it's kind of like if like the metaphor I'd use for that is imagine that you are very committed to getting a gold medal in hurdling. And what I notice as you asked me to come help you train, and what I notice is that you're putting a lot of attention on learning how to jump, but you can't actually really walk or run very well. And so I say, okay, well, we're going to actually slow way down. We're going to take you away from those hurdles. We're just going to have you focus on walking, first of all. That, Adam, it's all fine and good to look at how I'm relating to someone, but someday I have to do something with them is a lot like that person, that hurdling Olympic hopeful saying, Adam, it's fine. I know walk, sure, but at some point I've got to run and jump the hurdle. So let's talk about that. It's moot. It's moot. It's putting the cart before the horse. So yes, absolutely, there'll be a time to look at what there is to do. But before you can do that, we need to slow you way down so you can see the thing that's getting in the way, which is the way that you are relating to someone. And until you start to get a hold of this, all that other stuff will be for naught. It won't make the difference you want it to. This is what I was talking about, I think, in my abortive attempt, sort of yeah, you want to get from X to Y, but before you can do that, you have to see all of the stuff you have to do in the depths of the ontological layer first. So that's what we're supporting you to start to see here. So here are some practices, some ways you can begin to work with this. And the best thing to start to see is the times when you get triggered. So that's a word a lot of people don't like. We have a context for it. We have a judgment of being triggered. And as a leader, we want to believe, I don't get triggered. I used to, but these days, no, I can be with anything. Wrong. That's incorrect. And I can tell you that's incorrect because you got two nostrils, two eyes, you got a heart, you got a mouth, you're a human. Humans get triggered, and we will forever get triggered. Even the Buddha gets triggered, I assert. Maybe not the aspirational Buddha who can be with everything, but anyone else, life is about continuing to find our edge and then step beyond it. That's the process of transformation and growth. Anytime there's an edge, which you will always have, you will have a point where you get triggered at that edge. Another way to think of this is you have an infinite amount of yourself to be expressed and a finite existing current capacity to express it. So you're going to get triggered as a leader unless you're not really up to much. If you're not really standing for very much, if you're not really supporting people to step into their own confrontation, then you might not get triggered. But if you're actually causing transformation, if you're doing something that matters, you're going to get triggered. So the start for all of this is to recognize the times we get triggered. Anytime we get hooked or triggered or confronted by the way someone is being, what happens is our perspective narrows. Our focus becomes more linear. And that's when we start to do things like they're not a candidate for leadership, or they're just flaky, or they're a narcissist, or whatever it happens to be. It's very effective when we're afraid because it takes away options and we can just focus on survival. But in the modern world where our survival is not really at stake and that same mechanism is applied to things like just the unknown, it's a problem. So some ways you can start to notice yourself when you get caught are like the easiest ones to catch are when you are annoyed by someone, when you are frustrated by someone, when you feel impatient with someone. All of these are really good diagnostics. And recognizing them is really the start of the work, because what's going to happen is as you get hooked that way, your perspective is going to narrow and you're going to be more inclined towards a particular seeing of that person, a particular label for how they are. The second practice is kind of an acknowledgement for yourself. So I really want to invite you as you practice with that to recognize that when you are hooked or triggered by someone and you give yourself permission to be there, you give yourself permission to be hooked, to be triggered. You don't try to tell yourself you're not. You instead just say, I'm annoyed, I'm triggered. That is growth as a leader. It is okay to be triggered. In fact, it's essential to acknowledge that truth. You are a human. And when you allow that possibility to exist, when instead of insisting that you've got this all handled and you don't get triggered by people, but instead allow the space for your humanity to exist, that moves you closer to addressing it. The leaders that are like, I never get triggered by anyone, that doesn't happen, I can be with anyone, those are the leaders that have massive blind spots because they are simply unwilling to accept the fact that they have those blind spots. They're unwilling to accept the fact that they've got a place they get triggered and consequently they can't see it. So if all you did as a start in this practice was notice your own annoyance, your own frustration, your own impatience with someone, and start to acknowledge that inside of yourself, recognize and acknowledge in the moment, that already is your leadership developing. That's the very first step. It's not all the steps, but it's the beginning and it's an important one. So if you can start to catch that in the moment, not right now as you're listening, thinking about, oh yeah, that time and that time, but like in the moment, oh, it's happening right now. Amazing. Once you start to catch that, you want to notice what are the labels that I'm applying? What is the way of being happening here that I'm hooked into? And when you get hooked into something, it becomes harder to pull up and out and create the altitude. That's ultimately what we're doing here in this practice today, is helping you start to create some altitude for someone so you can see the larger picture. You can see the whole, the entirety of the iceberg. So as you start to do that, one, it can be helpful, I find, to consider that labeling people is an abdication of our leadership. We kind of, a lot of good, not great leaders kind of wear it almost like a badge of honor. Like they'll tell you stories like, this person just wasn't a candidate for leadership and I did the powerful leadership thing and I let them go. I told them that and I let them go and I feel good about myself. That's great. But on some level, you were abdicating from your leadership because rather than take this on as your thing, your inability to see their wholeness, you put it on them. And the leader committed to transformation, ontological work, is the leader who always takes the work on themselves first. So every time we have a label, every time we notice we get hooked and are hooked into a particular seeing of that person, we want to bring it over here and really recognize, oh, I got caught. I got hooked. And I'm going to this label because it makes things easier. It makes my hook easier to move past. So that's step 3. Step 4, the final process here is to really get clear on who this person is underneath your labeling of them. And so there's parts to this. One is to resist the urge to slap the label on them and move on. this urge is really compelling. It gives us a sense of productivity. It gives us a sense of like, it allows us to not have to sit in our own discomfort, our own trigger. It lets us be right about them rather than having to look on our side, which is always harder. So this is what you're up against. The floor is a little tilted if you really want to help people transform, is that you're going to have a bit of resistance because it's easier to go this route. But if you're not going to do that, if you're really, really willing to kind of like lean in and start to see the bigger picture, what we want to do is trace it back, trace the way they're showing up on the surface back to who they are at their core. And I've got great news. I have a tool to support you with this, along with a link that I've buried somewhere. Here's the link. Let me copy that. So I'm going to put this in our comments because I'm a really good guy, a classic good guy. Let me just make a note here. Quick reference guide. There you go. There's a link to it. So what that link provides is a link to a nice PDF of what's in the back of my book. This is my book. I'll just show it quickly. Who Do You Think You Are? By Adam Quiney. And it's a guide to this. It shows the same guide I've got in the back of this book. And what this reference guide does is it lists a whole bunch of qualities of being. I tried to create a fairly comprehensive list in this book. So for example, adventure, brilliance, champion, commitment, connection, creation, curiosity, power, leader, wisdom, wit. Sounds like I'm naming sports players as they come onto the field. Love, number 93, magic. Anyhow, it lists all of those qualities. And then what I list are the shadow aspects for each of those qualities. The shadow aspects are the parts of you that you learn to do to compensate for feeling like too little or too much. So if we were to look up like flaky here, we've got, oh, okay, here we go, flaky hummingbird. And that we can trace that back to, oh, the being of commitment. And then if you had the book, you could read more about it. But you don't need to do that. It's enough for you to simply, as a leader, begin to recognize, oh, who this person is commitment, the very thing I'm trying to force them into. But they're showing up afraid. And when they get afraid, they show up this way. And you might do nothing other than start to see them in that entirety. And if that's all you begin to develop the ability to do, you are going to shift the amount of choices, the range of possibilities, the way you can work with this person. Your heart is going to open a little bit more because instead of being frustrated that you hired a flaky person and needing to create a better, weeding out process in your hiring so that you don't have these sort of morons show up in your company. Instead, you can start to see like, oh, it's not that they're flaky. It's that they bring commitment. They're just afraid something's going on. That allows us to have a little more space for people and their humanity. And that allows change to step in. Space allows different things to happen. And so as you start to practice with this, things will start to open up for you. So I really recommend checking out that quick reference guide. It's a super easy PDF. I think it looks pretty nice. I was going to click on it myself. How's that look? Oh man, super good. It references the pages of the book, but that's completely optional. It's not a requirement. You don't need to reference the book at all. And I want to be clear, like the last thing I want to do on these lives is plug create, the webinar that you go to that is really about selling you the intensive. That's not ever what I want to do, but I think that this is really helpful. So that's why I'm putting it here. And I'm doing my best to sort of provide it in a way that, that allows you to do something with it right now, rather than having to go and get another thing to then try to do the thing and so on and so forth. So if you start to take this stuff on, what you're going to start to find happens is that you begin to see people in a bigger, better, broader, more caring, more compassionate light. And your awareness, your ability to see all of who they are will increase. And the more of the person you can see, the more options you have. Just like the more of the iceberg I raise out of the water, the better equipped I am, the more choices I have to move it, to manage it, to do something with it, to have the impact on it that I wish to have. And so there's more to be done after this. And some of our series as we go forward on ontological leadership will cover the more, what's to come. But if all you do is begin to do this, you are going to be moving yourself radically forward and you will start to stand out from a lot of the other leaders in the world because this is the stuff that goes unseen. Okay. I think that's everything that we've got this week. Let me have a sip of tea and just check in. Yes, I've concluded it is. A big thank you, Jared. Thank you for posting a link to the stream, and big thank you to everyone that came across. My apologies for like gumming that up. I'm I've shifted this from Facebook to LinkedIn. It's a different, it's where this conversation is better served. It's a different system for streaming all of this stuff. So I'm working with that. And I want to finish up today by sharing like the intention I have for literally everything I post, but especially this series, is that value is created for you just by being here. I never, ever, ever want to create a post where people read it and the post is basically like trying to get you to go somewhere else, or like the primary reason of the post is to manipulate you to do something or to whatever it happens to be. It's always to support value. This is why I don't have a very big audience, is because that's my primary commitment, as opposed to my primary commitment being growing an audience, which is better served by other approaches. So thanks everyone for tuning in. If you like this, leave a comment, drop a line, let me know. Even click that like little emoji thing. And I hope to see you at the next one, which I indeed will run through the event that I create. I'll be doing that at the start of the next week. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.